Second Lieutenant John Roberts Jack Whipple, United States Army Air Corps, World War II. Folks, this is a rare story. The only story I remember, a glider pilot in World War II. I interviewed Jack in his home in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was March 28, 2004, over 21 years ago, almost 21 years ago. And his wife, Audrey, she's at the end of this interview. I like it when I can interview the women at times too, so stay tuned for a little bit from Jack's wife. But I call him Jack Whipple, second lieutenant, and he flew the Corsair, the Horsa gliders. They were the airspeed gliders in World War II, British-made gliders, cargo and troop carrier gliders, military gliders. And Jack flew a glider on D-Day, June 6, 1944, in Normandy. You hear a lot about the troops that landed in the Airborne, but we don't, in the Navy, but we don't hear much about the glider pilots. And a lot of them had some problems, and Jack did too. So he tells a great story. So happy to share this with you today. Jack received 3 air medals during his service in World War II. Also flew the C-47 troop carriers, picking up wounded and bringing in cargo and supplies as a navigator and a co-pilot. So Jack just did a lot of things in the military, and just a great man. I interviewed him. He's about 83. He lived to 2018, 97 years of age, passed away in 2018. I believe his wife Audrey's still alive, so I hope she still is. But this was just a great opportunity to learn from history. Again, his eyes and ears to what happened. Flew with the 437th Troop Carrier Squadron and the 83rd Squadron in World War II. And happy to bring a story to you here on my Voices of History channel. I want to thank Glenn Alward for stepping forward and sponsoring Jack's story. Glenn, God bless you. Thank you. I salute you, sir. Thank you for supporting my work and our veterans and our country. I really appreciate you, Glenn, and I hope we can work together again. And I'm just excited to share this story for you too and your family. So God bless you. Thank you for your help. Folks, if you'd like to help sponsor a story, there's always information in the video description, in the comments section of my videos. If you'd like to donate to this work, it's listener supported, viewer supported, folks. I would greatly appreciate any help. Even the radio station is listener supported, so that's going Voices of History Radio 24 hours a day. So in our 3rd year right now. But my heart's full. As we go forward in 2025, I do more interviews this year too. Continue to feature these stories here on this great YouTube channel. I'm really thankful that I can serve my God and my country through the lens of my camera. So, okay, folks, I think I said it all. Thank you for watching and listening. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, and I appreciate any comments that you send. We always appreciate it. So, and to share these videos, folks. History is best learned from those who were there. And our World War II generation is almost gone. And I'm just glad we have these stories that continue on. And those of you that have helped me, you know who you are. Thank you so much. And I know there's others that would like to help. So I would appreciate any help that you can afford this project. Amen. Thank you, and God bless you, and enjoy Jack's story. You're just going to be talking to me.
Okay.
I'm going to be sitting here.
Yep.
And just try to stay, don't move too much, and we'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah. But the first thing I want you to do is just tell me, you were with the Army or the Air Force?
I was in the Air Corps.
Okay, Air Corps. Just tell me briefly the unit or division, 437th, and your rank during, and you're a glider pilot, so that's obvious.
Right.
Okay. Go ahead. Just steer
I was
forward.
in the 437th Troop Carrier Squad. Are we on now?
Yes.
I was in the 437th Troop Carrier Squadron, 80 Troop Carrier Group, the 83rd Squadron, and my rank when I joined the group was flight officer, Later, I received a commission as a second lieutenant.
Go back to the night before D-Day, or before you took off. Well, actually, you took off that night. I mean, you took off early.
In the daytime.
Yeah. Tell me, just back up just maybe 24 hours before. Tell me where you were, and what you were getting ready to do, and maybe just the mood of all the personnel, the men you're with, and then lead into the actual part that you took as far as taking off and all that.
We began training well before that. We had extensive training. My particular squadron had additional training with the Horsa airspeed glider, which was a British glider that we took into Normandy. We had been loading during the 24 hours previous to that, and had briefings with the Air Corps, also with the Airborne, to keep us up to date on what was going on, where we would be, what was expected of us. The feeling of most of the people involved was pretty positive and pretty light, because we didn't really know what was involved, I guess. We had been cooped up well for about 5 days prior. We couldn't leave the base. We went to have our meals. We would form up at our barracks, march to the mess halls, march to the briefings, march to wherever we went. It was always in a group and always very secure, so there was no possibility of any of the information leaking out. There were some poker games going on, as usual, some dice games. There were just a lot of people were quiet. There were a lot of people were writing letters. Most of them were writing letters to their wives or families. The mood was pretty high, though. Everyone was quite excited and quite determined. We knew where we were going. We knew what we were going to do, and so I guess that was about it.
Did you have any type of prayer service, or was there a chaplain or a minister there?
Yes, there was. There was a chaplain at the just before takeoff, where all the gliders and troplanes were marshaled, and the chaplain did an extensive prayer and all those the air crews of the Air Corps, as well as the troop carrier people, the glider-borne troops, were all there, and it was quite moving.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember anything about that? I mean,
I don't.
Okay. That's, you know what, I'm trying to find a chaplain, somebody who was actually involved in the whole thing, but I haven't found anybody yet. But
yeah,
I think that would be an interesting story.
Well, there was a chaplain attached to each group, and in some cases the chaplain might have been a Catholic, he might have been a Protestant, he might have been a rabbi. I don't recall. I think ours was probably a Protestant chaplain.
So that's the time before. Now lead into the actual deployment of the glider planes, and explain exactly how you were released and the whole bit, because I haven't heard the whole story yet. So just tell me about this.
Well, to get in our lift, there were 18 Horsa airspeeds, along with about 30 Waco CG-4As, which was the U.S. glider. And they were all stacked very closely together. We called them marshaled. with the tow planes were also marshaled right in with them at the end of the runway, and so that all at the point of takeoff, when it became our turn to take off of our particular tow plane with towing the glider, our gliders, the tow plane would pull forward to the proper distance. They were handled by hand signals from the tow planes so that the tow rope would be tight when they began. And so if the tow rope was, if the tow plane had moved out too fast and popped, it would have pulled broken the tow rope or pulled it out of the tow rope fittings out of the glider or the tail of the plane. So anyway, they were just marshaled that way, and it worked well. And as we took off, then we would form up as shortly after takeoff, and the first plane would, of course, keep circling the field with towing the glider, and then the second would get into formation, third and fourth, and so on, so that it took perhaps 30 seconds for each tow plane to get off and get clear the runway to make room for the next one, and so it would take maybe 20, 30 minutes to get them all off, or maybe more than that, possibly. And then as soon as we were formed up into formation, we got on the course. Our course was roughly flying from Ramsbury, which was in southwest England in the Wiltshire district, and we went down the east coast of Torquay towards Land's End, which is the farthest southerly point in England. Then we turned left or easterly, cutting across not far from the tip of the Normandy Peninsula, Cherbourg. We got over to the east side of the Normandy Peninsula and turned southerly. And all this time, it was about a 3-hour flight. During that time, we had air cover provided by P-47 fighter group that was specifically assigned to do that job. We saw no German airplanes of any kind during that time. We proceeded on down south along the east side of the Normandy Peninsula, and at the initial point where we turned inland would have been just easterly from the Utah Beach. We proceeded over Utah Beach. At that time, after we got past the beach, we started receiving some small arms fire. I don't recall that there was any flak at all, but there was a good deal of small arms fire. One of our tow planes was shot down at that time. That pilot made a good landing. The glider, of course, cut off. He didn't get to the land at the designated spot. He was short of that, but he was okay also. And then we proceeded in just at St. Mary Glace. We received a signal that to get ready to release. And at that point, we were looking for our landing spots. That time we also found that the fields were not as big as we expected them to be, that the hedgerows were very dense and very thick, so it became more of every guy for himself. Every glider pilot at that point started picking his own field, and which was probably maybe a mile past our original place to cut off and land. And we got actually extended the line out past St. Mary Glace by about a mile. After we got on the ground, we started to meeting some of the airborne people, some of the paratroopers who had been there, who had arrived that morning, and they told us that as we landed, that the German troops had pulled out very quickly and moved away from that area, and so we were actually didn't know it, but we had extended the line.
Now again, what time did you, it was on June 6th that you actually took off?
Yes,
Okay.
we took off at 6:40 p.m.
p.m.
Double standard time, summer
Now, did
Greenwich time.
Did some of the glider planes go in earlier?
Yes. There were some glider flights that were in just before dawn. There were some in after dawn. And then I think that was all through the day. And the paratroopers were also, the paratroopers had preceded the gliders by 30 minutes or so.
Was that where all the casualties were incurred? Was those first groups that went out, or was that
No,
just
I think the casualties occurred with every group that went in. One of the problems, I think one of the major problems was that first, most of the gliders were heavily overloaded. As the glider pilots, we were supposed to make sure that we didn't get overloaded, but we couldn't be there watching the airborne people all the time, and they brought all kinds of stuff, which they needed and they wanted. They were encouraged by their commanders to take extra mines, to take extra ammunition. My load was a Jeep, an anti-tank gun that weighed as much as the Jeep. It was a 57 millimeter anti-tank gun. The loading equipment, camouflage nets, extra ammunition, all the extra food, extra supplies of most any kind you can think of. And all the airborne troops. I had the gun crew was 4 men, the gunnery sergeant, a gunner, and a Jeep driver and another gunner. And so we were probably not different than most of the gliders. We were perhaps 800 to 1,000 pounds overloaded. So to make a good landing, we had to maintain a little higher speed than normal, which is harder to dissipate. In my case, I started my approach, and my co-pilot asked me if it was okay. He asked me what field I was going for, and I told him, and he said, okay, can I do anything now? And I said, yes, give me full flaps, because I needed to descend very rapidly, and I got full flaps. And he says, is it okay if I go in the back now? And I said yes, because there's no more that he could do. And so when I got down, I got the glider on the ground, and I could see I was going to run out of space. And so I pushed the full rudder and put the glider in what we called a ground loop. It didn't loop into the air, it just spun around on the ground. In doing so, I was able to dissipate forward momentum and put it into angular or centrifugal momentum that cut my landing distance down so that when I got to the hedgerows, well, I didn't even get to the hedgerows, but probably half of the gliders of the horses all got into the hedgerows, and the results was pretty bad. Of the 18 horse gliders that in my lift, there were only 3 that did not sustain a damage. The others were all damaged anywhere from medium to totaled out. As a result of that, we had probably around 20% casualties. Not deaths. There were 2 deaths, 2 glider pilots that died, and I don't know how many airborne, perhaps the same. And there were about 8 or 9 seriously injured glider pilots. 2 of them, their injuries were so extensive that they didn't even get back to our field. They went directly to a hospital. They spent about a month in the hospital and then were shipped back to the States. Some of the casualties were minor, and they were able to rejoin our group after a hospital stay.
And you mentioned you flew over Utah Beach that evening, I guess, or whatever.
Yes.
Were you able to see down on the beaches and see any
Yes.
of the destruction and and I don't know, maybe even some of the soldiers that were lying on the beach? Could you see any of that?
I couldn't see any of them lying on the beach. I was so impressed, I guess, between our turning point was perhaps 5 miles off of Utah Beach, over the water. And then from then on, I could see so many ships. I couldn't believe the number of ships I was looking at. It was just almost wall to wall. This is an expression. It wasn't quite that, but they were all ships of every variety, starting with the large Navy destroyers and battleships, on down to the Higgins boats. But no, after we started the approach, I pretty much focused on keep them in the formation and watching for our checkpoints so that I'd know when to release.
Sure. How fast was that tow plane going?
Our speed that they should have been going was about 90 miles an hour, and that's about what they were all doing. And the gliders were probably mostly those that were overloaded, which was most of them, all maintained someplace between 85 and 90 miles an hour on the approach after they got off of the tow. The tow planes, of course, as soon as we left the landing zone, they left the formations, dropped the ropes, and they had a prescribed, a designated course set, and they got on that course and left. Then they could go faster. They were probably doing someplace in the neighborhood of 150 or 160.
Now you were carrying supplies, is that what
Yeah.
you were doing? You had designated landings areas, and
Yes.
you were supposed to be intercepted by airborne troops or the ground troops or both?
Well, we had the airborne troops with us.
Okay.
We were the airborne
But
troops.
they were with you in the planes?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay, so now I've heard 2 different things, and I've seen some stuff too. Okay, how many of those troops were on those gliders?
That depended on what was loaded. If in my case, the Jeep, and then the anti-tank gun, and then the gun crew, which was 4 men, in addition to me and my co-pilot. In some cases, they were bringing in maybe just, there was one little tractor that they brought in.
Okay.
And they would, in that case, that tractor weighed, it was pretty good weight, but there might have been, in addition to the tractor, there were perhaps 8 or 10 people of the airborne. In one case, another case was the medical people. They had a Jeep and a little wagon or that was full of medical supplies, plus the medical people. So they could have had probably something in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 in addition to the pilot and co-pilot.
So now, what was the mood of the troops on your particular glider? Because Were they apprehensive? Were they scared, do you think, or what was?
Oh, yeah, they were all a little apprehensive. I think that was kind of standard with all of the airborne people. They didn't have, we didn't have parachutes. There was no emergency out for anybody. The paratroopers, of course, were wearing their parachutes and their equipment, so that was their job. But in the case of the glider people, there were no parachutes involved. Or in the Air Corps, we didn't have parachutes. It wouldn't have looked good for the for the airborne troops to have us with a parachute and them without. So everyone was a little apprehensive, a little nervous, and very glad to be on the ground. Once.
So tell me again. I'm learning as I'm going. Talking
Okay.
with you. Your original mission was to bring in the troops, the supplies, and what have you, and
Yes.
then again at some point meet up with the troops coming into the beaches, or is that how that
Yes,
was going to work?
that's right. The people on the beaches had they had their objectives, and that was to take and secure the beaches. And then as soon as that was done, they would start their movement inward towards St. Mary Glace. Most of the airborne troops were dropped quite near, or not too far from St. Mary Glace. Both the 82nd Airborne, which was the division that my particular unit was involved with on that day, and the 101st Airborne, which was the other one. The two designated landing zones and drop zones were perhaps within 7 miles of each other. And it didn't all work out quite that way. There were some paratroopers who were dropped all the way across the Normandy Peninsula because of for various reasons.
Yeah.
Most of which was those were the people who had come in at night, the night paradrops, and the Air Corps got, in some cases, dropped their loads too early. There were very few that were dropped too late, none to my knowledge, but some of them did get dropped too early.
Well, I've heard some horror stories about the glider planes and even the airborne landings, mislandings, and that happened probably the early morning of June 6th?
Yes, and when it was dark. There was, in addition to the just being dark or just barely light, on the west coast of Normandy, and that's where most of the paratroopers came, and that was their route, to go down the western side of the Normandy Peninsula and then turn easterly and come across. As they got into a fog bank. And the standard procedure when an airplane formation gets into a fog or cloud situation is that they are not able to see each other, so there's a prescribed specific maneuver, and the mid plane would continue straight forward. The two wing people would turn outward to get away and provide more space between the jump planes or the tow planes, in which case it happened to both jump planes and into the tow planes with the glider-borne. When they did that, they were actually maybe half a mile on each side to start with, away from the center plane, which was still maintaining that course. The other two would then, after a few seconds, would turn back to the original course. But as they come out of the fog, they're already dispersed, perhaps from the left to the right, over a mile. And so that's part of what happened. Because of that, there were people dropped all the way across the peninsula. Yeah. Most of them still was dropped with reasonably close to the drop zones, but not in all cases. I saw part of it.
Okay. Well, there's a scene in there where there's a crashed glider plane, and that was my first visual kind of look at that. I don't know if it was anything like that, if they reconstructed that right or anything, but I know they had the Airborne guys and a whole bit. But as far as what I've researched and things, I've heard, like I said, I've heard some horror stories about the landings and
Yeah.
the whole bit. But you being trained as a pilot, I mean, to me, was there was it a safe way to travel? You're not really.
Yeah,
traveling,
it
but
really
you cut
was.
loose. I mean, you just have so much control, right? You can't.
Yeah, a glider is nothing but an airplane without an engine. Mm-hmm. It has all the same controls, flight controls. Everything is the same. It flies just exactly like an airplane, except you're constantly descending. Mm-hmm. To keep. You must maintain your airspeed to keep forward motion, and so it's really a safe way to go. But it's and so far as the glider pilots, our training, the focus of our entire training was on landings. That's the main thing we did. We did approaches from 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, 360 degree overheads, down, right, left. And this went on for a year. We trained in first small light planes, which were called Cubs and Taylorcrafts and Ronkas, little two-place planes, and then sailplanes and some training gliders that were similar to the main cargo gliders in that they had a similar glide ratio, similar flying characteristics. And we did the same thing with the actual cargo gliders once we got to those. And so we were just and we did these approaches and landings from various altitudes. In actual practice, all of our airborne combat landings were done at around 500 or 600 feet altitude when we released, so that we had just perhaps 2 turns and we would be on our approach. We were towed right to the designated spot in almost every case except Normandy, and that was our first experience with it, and there were a lot of hitches. Again, most of those occurred in the dark, when it was dark or cloudy, foggy, and but for the most part, everyone got down within a mile or so of where they were supposed to, and that's not too far when you're dealing with that many people or that many airplanes in one area at one time. Worked out quite well.
The glider, though, was designed because, how can I say it? Was it a sneaky way to get into the area?
Yes, it was.
You were cut loose. I mean, what kind of tow plane towed the glider? What kind of plane was that?
In our case, was all C-47s.
Okay, were those noisy?
Oh yeah, sure.
So were you cut loose far enough away from the Germans to where they wouldn't notice you coming in? Or?
No, they knew. They could hear the tow planes. A tow plane formation would be just like a bomber formation. It'd be pretty noisy, except that the tow planes and our approaches were all done around 600 feet, where the medium bombers, for the most part, were the 10 to 15,000 foot altitudes, and the big bombers, the B-17s, and the big British bombers were at 15 to 20,000 roughly. But yeah, they were noisy, and we didn't surprise anyone. I think that might have been early on with some of the German operations that took place that had been quite successful for the Germans. But in our case, we came in a reasonably tight formation, and it would have been very noisy. And we just cut loose at our designated spot and make a landing.
Sure. Yeah. What are your thoughts about D-Day? I mean, based on what you were involved with and looking back 60 years, tell me your thoughts about D-Day and the importance of D-Day.
Well, I thought it really went off very, very well, considering the magnitude of the thing. When you think of thousands, 5,000, for instance, ships that were involved doing the seaborne landings, the thousands of airplanes that were involved, not just the troop carrier. In the case of the troop carrier, there were, over a period of the few hours and the time spans involved, and that we couldn't all come in at once. It had to be a pre-planned, which it was, where so many could come in at once, and there was room for those people to maneuver and land. If we'd had many more, they'd have to have a different landing area. Same with the paratroopers. You can only have so many planes occupying so much space at one time. Well, anyway, I think it went very well. The airborne people did their job. They did a wonderful job. Those who didn't get landed or get down in the exact spot was pre-planned. They still went ahead with their objectives and tried to do it. There was a mix-up in some cases of the 82nd and the 101st on the ground, and they were formed up together as units together to achieve other objectives. And overall, I think it went well. I think it went remarkably well.
Did you ever think we would look back 60 years and go, wow, I mean, we're celebrating the 60th anniversary.
Yeah, this year, isn't it?
At the time, as a young man, I mean, you probably weren't even thinking about history being made.
No, I didn't think of
doing
that.
your job. Tell me about, now you're being towed by this plane. You're taking off. Is there a cable that you're behind it, like a tow truck? And then you take off? I mean, isn't that a rough ride for you?
No, there's a little roughness. You're getting in some prop wash as you take off, but there's the glider being lighter. One of the main reasons they're lighter is because they have no engines. You know, the engines constitute a great deal of the weight of a normal aircraft. They're big and heavy. And fuel is another major factor. We didn't have fuel, we didn't have engines, so perhaps that would be 30–40% of the weight of the plane. But after we got, we'd get off first, and we'd get about 10 or 15 feet in the air, just above the prop wash. And then as the tow plane, we'd be off first. We could fly at maybe 50 miles an hour, where the takeoff speed of a C-47 would be more in the 60 or 70, 75 miles an hour. Particularly towing would have to be a little higher. So as the tow plane got its speed, and just before they were ready to take off, the glider pilot would nose down a little bit and take a little of the tow pressure off the rope to let the tow plane have a little more speed, and then the tow plane would get off, and we'd remain above the prop wash of the tow plane. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't really rough, or any rougher than the air that the tow plane would experience.
That's interesting to me. Listening you talk about that, I'm going to change my tape right now. Significance of D-Day. You know, looking back now, why was D-Day so important? I mean,
well, it was important so that to do that, that's the only way that the Allied troops would be able to effectively gain a foothold on Europe. Mm-hmm. And the long-range plan, of course, was to assault Hitler's Fortress Europe, as it was referred to. And so D-Day was the first step, actually. The seaborne people came in, achieved their goals at the beaches. Utah Beach and Omaha Beach and Sword and the British and Canadian beaches. The same, there were airborne troops that had landed inland. Now, our main purpose in landing where we did was to take and hold all of the roads so that the Germans were not able to put any pressure on from the beach landings. So with us achieving our goals of holding those roads, and then the seaborne people could effectively move onto the beach. That airborne, of course, we didn't have any large guns, we didn't have tanks, we didn't have trucks. We had Jeeps, a few Jeeps, and these anti-tank guns, small. The 57's about as small as they can be. But so with us doing our job, the beach people who were coming with all of the major landings and the major number of personnel, and then the equipment, and the big guns, the big tanks, the trucks, everything else that they needed to do their job. But if we could, in that first 24 hours, if we could prevent, and this happened not only just at Utah Beach and Omaha Beach, it happened at both the Canadian and the British beaches. One of the most famous was called Pegasus Bridge, where the British landed and did their job. And but this was a very well planned and very well thought out whole scheme of things. And of course, the airborne portion was to just take and hold those areas so that the Germans couldn't maneuver and bring in more of anything. And that had been done even more extensively, in that we had fighters and light bombers that were out that had cut all of the rail lines for 50 to 100 miles away from the beaches, so that the Germans couldn't use any of those railroads. We were out with more bombers and fighters and strafing and on the highways, and it worked. And of course the airborne part was to take and hold these key roads so that the Allies wouldn't be bothered with Germans. Specifically.
Again, when you flew over the beach, were you aware of how bad it was on the beaches earlier that day?
No, we really weren't. We were too busy. We could look down and get a quick look, but in a formation, you don't have a lot of time to be looking around. You really you have to keep focus on what you're doing.
But you were being towed over Utah. You weren't cut loose yet.
Pardon?
You were being towed over Utah Beach.
Yes.
You were in transit.
We were being towed. And then for the next 7 miles from the beach into St. Mary Glace was about 7 miles, and then that's when we started our release procedures.
Did you fly over Omaha Beach or just Utah Beach?
Utah Beach only. Yeah. There were other gliders landing back of Omaha Beach, and I don't recall those groups, what their numbers were.
But what was your job after you were done, after you landed? I mean, then what did you as a pilot do?
The pilot and co-pilot then, we'd help unload the load, which we did. In our case was the Jeep and the anti-tank gun. Then we stayed right with our airborne people we had taken in. And by the time we got unloaded and got to everything ready to move out, our load, it was getting almost dark, and we were moved up to I guess what would be called a battery headquarters, where we spent the night. We were in the wrong place, a little bit, about a mile farther west of where we should have been. So some of us were isolated, and in my case, we were a little isolated with about 5 or 6 other glider loads. And we spent the night with those airborne troops. The next morning, the first lieutenant in charge said, "We've got to have somebody go back to St. Mary Glace and report to our commander where we are." And he called for volunteers, and I volunteered to do that. And so we worked Another glider pilot and I went back. We first got through a hedgerow and found some more U.S. troops, some of the airborne people who were set up with mortars, and asked them who they were and where they were, and so we worked our way back that way. And as soon as we got back to St. Mary Glace, then we reported the location of this particular group of about 6 glider loads, and then that part of our job was done. The next thing I did, a major in the Airborne came along and said, asked me to take 2 Jeeps with the trailers and go out to some of the gliders that had crashed and get the supplies and ammunitions out of those. And I did that. I guess by then it was getting around noon, and then we had some lunch and just stayed at division headquarters for another couple, 3 hours. We were posted out as perimeter guards at division headquarters, and that's where we spent the rest of the day.
Let me ask you a question. I've asked most of the veterans this question, but kind of off the subject just a little bit as far as the gliders, but what does freedom mean to you? I mean, you probably heard that Friday night, some of the men talking about it, but what does freedom mean to Jack? I mean, regarding, maybe what you went through, World War II in general, and just the things that we enjoy in this country, but that we take for granted. But what does freedom mean to you?
Well, it means everything to me. It means my lifestyle, my choices I wish to make. I'm not hindered like many of the people of the world still are today. That's the wonderful part of our country, is the freedoms that we enjoy, and it means everything to me. It's just one of those wonderful things that comes with a free country and a free democracy.
We had some young people there Friday night and last night, but if you could say something to the young people kind of along the same lines as far as freedoms and not taking them for granted, and the fact that, freedom is not free, what would you say to a young person today about life or just, freedom? I mean, what would you tell?
Well, I just tell them to pursue within the limits of all of our laws, that every possibility to keep and maintain our free way of life. It's just such a wonderful way to live. We don't have to ask somebody to make a trip. If you wanted to go to Denver, we could just go to Denver or Los Angeles or New York or any place in the world. A lot of people can't leave their little hometown, even in particularly some of the Arabian countries today.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Okay. So you knew it was time to go. I mean,
yes.
The war was on and everybody's probably going, and you figured you'd go in.
I enlisted directly into the glider program. It was a program that was available. There was the regular cadet program for flying airplanes, and the waiting list, I guess, to me, it was too long. There was about a year and a half wait, and I was anxious to get going and get into it. And the recruiting sergeant that I spoke with said, "Well, we just got this new glider program, and maybe you'd like to consider that." And I looked at it and said, "Yeah, I'll do that," because I like to fly. I'd had some flight training, 40 hours of flight training at the University of Utah it was called the civilian pilot training, and I was, that was one of the qualifications, that you have a private license, which I had at that time, and so that was what I thought was going to be my fast track to finishing up, getting a regular assignment.
Now, Audrey, where were you during the war?
Living in Utah.
Everybody, I said, these people are
Cool.
but just again, what you were just saying about the taking the color out of the Lucky Strikes and the aluminum. Just tell me that again. That's interesting
Okay.
to me as far as the war and what was going on.
Right, well, I was very young. I was about 10 when obviously did not know Jack. And in the center of our little town was a big, like a truck bed. And the parents would all tell you to take pots and pans down, particularly aluminum, I remember. And we would put our extra pots and pans in there and they'd go be melted off for some military truck. I don't know what they use them for, airplane parts. And we saved our gum wrappers. You know, the gum used to come in a silver foil, and we'd peel that inner white layer off and roll that up and put it in with the aluminum. There was a big campaign. Lucky Strike Green has gone to war. And of course, it was a heavy smoking time at that point. So, but the Lucky Strike Green packages became, I think they were just white with a red and white trim on them. But all of the dye that used to go into those packages went off because, as you see, all of the aircraft and everything are a green camouflage color. So all of that dye color would go there. And to learn about the war, there were two sources, the radio, well, three, the radio, of course, and we all sat on the floor around the radio and we would listen to, his name will come to me, anyway, listen to the newscasts, and then Saturday morning movies were always the big things in small towns. And we children would go down to watch the movies, and there'd be the newscasts before the actual movie that we went to see. And that would show us the air war that Jack was involved with and all these things. It was just, for a little girl, it was just stunning to look at that and try and figure out really what was going on over there.
You said it was hard. I mean, as a 10-year-old or 12-year-old, I mean, life must have been different during the war. I mean, even more so than today, because, you know, the country really came together. And
oh, absolutely. And none of my friends had big brothers or sisters, because the sisters were working in plants and the boys had gone off to war. So it was a strange family feeling because the youth, older youth, were not there anymore.
Were you aware of, do you remember of any incidences where maybe some of your friends or family members or had loved ones that were maybe wounded or killed over
Oh,
there?
yes.
And do you remember anything to come to mind as far as that, or how that was dealt with, or how the notification process was towards that? I mean, how did they notify families of a death, or what?
It was Western Union delivery most often. And to know that that doorbell had rung and that person was not there anymore really brought it home. I mean, that was particularly hard. And then later on, I had a friend whose brother was in the Bataan Death March, and that was, of course, that was well into the war, but that was terrible.
But it just seems like, you know, looking at things today, but back then, it just seemed like it was different back then. Just the country's commitment towards...
Oh, everyone was united, you know, and having lived through that, and then see Vietnam, which was such a divisive war for our country. It just, yes, everyone supported that war. Like Jack enlisting early, everyone just wanted to be in it. You didn't wait to be drafted. And
what were your thoughts as a little girl regarding Adolf Hitler or the Nazi regime? Do you remember any thoughts?
oh, yeah. You just plain didn't like him immediately. You knew it was bad. We weren't old enough to know all the diplomacies that were going on and all the evilness, but yes, you knew very well. And when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, we really knew that, because the Japanese people look different than we do. The Germans look like we do. So you couldn't make that race distinction then, and you couldn't feel that anger that you felt just seeing some poor Oriental person on the street who happened to look like the bad people. So as a child, that was a great distinction, because you knew what some enemy looked like and you didn't know what the others did.
I asked Jack this question, but what does freedom mean to you, or what does it represent in your life, or just any thoughts on freedom?
You know, I think we have taken it for granted all of our life. And I think programs like you that say, wow, you know, that was really important, because everything I knew as a child could have disappeared. And the freedom to go to the church you want to go, to wear the clothes you want to go, to get in a car and go on a holiday. None of those are possible if you don't have freedom.
That's so true. What do you think about our young people today, as far as, you know, society, you know, taking freedoms for granted, not realizing what happened?
There's absolutely no question. Even our own grandchildren do not have the knowledge, our middle one probably more than the other two, of what an intense battle that was for what they take for granted every day. And I think this group from Orem that's going back to play, I think as they get older they will find that the trip was minimal to the homework they had to do. And each of them have to do an assignment and really find out what that was about and what sacrifices were made to allow them now to go back there. Because maybe without the sacrifices, they wouldn't have been allowed to go overseas. And I think more of that needs to be done so that they really do understand. I think history is kind of forgotten as a subject in school, and I think it really needs to be brought back because they're forgetting. Some of them never knew.
How true what you just said. I know. That's part of my goal is to share this with the kids.
I think that's wonderful.